The most recognizable fast food icon in history is probably Colonel Sanders. However, did you know that KFC wasn't always this way? Even though he is essentially ubiquitous, few people are aware of the man's personal history. But before we find that out, watch the entire video to see how we respond to queries. Then click the bell icon and subscribe to our channel. The early life of Colonel Sanders. In 1890, Colonel Sanders was born in Henryville, Indiana, on a small farm. Only 5 years after his father, Wilbert Sanders, passed away, his mother had no choice but to work long hours sewing for neighbors' families while working at a nearby tomato canning factory. Sanders, the oldest of 3 siblings, was compelled to care for the house and his family in the interim, which is when he began to hone his cooking abilities. He began working at a nearby farm at the age of 10. When Sanders was 12 years old, his mother remarried and moved the family to her new husband's home in a suburb of Indianapolis. To put it mildly, he had a strained relationship with his new stepfather, and the two frequently quarreled. When Sanders was 13 years old, things at home finally came to a head, and he was sent back to Clark County, where the family had originally lived. Soon after, Colonel Sanders was hired to work on a farm in Greenwood, Indiana, where he was paid $10 to $15 per month, plus room and board for feeding animals and doing odd jobs. Around this time, Sanders, who had been attending school full-time while working on his farm, quit, having only completed the 6th grade. One day he would say, "Algebra is what drove me off." Sanders would take on various jobs throughout the American South for 28 years. These included working as a streetcar conductor, railroad fireman, insurance salesman, secretary, tire salesman, ferry operator, lawyer, and even for a brief period as a midwife. Really. In addition, he served briefly in the U.S. Army when he was sent to Cuba. Colonel Sanders' family life was also stormy, often turbulent, and occasionally tragic. He married Josephine King in 1908, and the couple went on to have 3 children together: Margaret, Harlan Jr., and Mildred. His inability to maintain a job quickly caused problems. However, Josephine ended up leaving him for a brief period due to his professional difficulties and taking the kids with her. They split up in 1947. Another catastrophe occurred when Harlan Jr., who was 20 years old, passed away due to complications from blood poisoning he acquired during a tonsillectomy, which was even thought to be a straightforward, routine procedure. Finally, he married Claudia Lettington in 1949, and they remained together until he died in 1980. The start of something new. Colonel Sanders eventually owned a gas station in Corbin, Kentucky. He started preparing and selling meals for weary travelers who stopped at the station to make ends meet. He developed a bit of a reputation for his culinary abilities in the area thanks to his food, which frequently included pan-fried chicken, ham, string beans, okra, and hot biscuits. Although it wasn't glamorous work, Sanders achieved success, something he had never experienced. After that, the colonel led a simple but contented life. He removed the gas pumps and opened his first restaurant a few years later. By this time, Sanders had started to refine the chicken recipe that KFC still keeps under lock and key. His winning streak intensified in 1939 when he created a pressure cooker cooking technique for chicken that reduced grease while retaining flavor, moisture, and texture without sacrificing cooking time. Sanders' restaurant thrived for more than 10 years, but tragedy was just around the corner. Colonel Sanders experienced 2 strokes of bad luck in quick succession in the 1950s, significantly jeopardizing the success he had finally found. The first was relocating the highway junction in front of his restaurant, effectively ending the heavy traffic that regularly passed and brought him customers. The announcement of a brand new interstate highway to be built on land 7 miles away from the restaurant would have been enough to harm his business on its own seriously. But instead, it became clear that Sanders and his restaurant were about to be left in the dirt. KFC's early success. Colonel Sanders, who was now entirely focused on his cooking after his restaurant closed, tried a new marketing strategy. He visited potential franchise restaurants while traveling the country, offering them his chicken recipe in exchange for 4 cents on each chicken sold. He later increased this to a nickel. As a result, a friend from Salt Lake City, Pete Harmon, became Sanders' first franchisee who had noticed a surge in business since starting to serve chicken prepared according to Sanders' technique and recipe. By 1964, he had opened over 600 franchised locations and created a multi-million-dollar business. However, at the time, the only restaurants that sold their chicken were Kentucky Fried Chicken locations. Colonel Sanders, 74 years old, was the owner of a successful business with 17 employees, an office, and a sizable profit margin. Predators were naturally drawn to it. A Kentucky lawyer named John Y. Brown Jr., age 29, and his millionaire client Jack Massey set out to persuade Sanders to sell his business. The Colonel, at first, firmly declined their offer. Then, for weeks, Brown and Massey worked to convince Sanders to change his mind. They advised him to retire and enjoy life because taxes would devastate his estate if he passed away before selling. They vowed never to change their recipe and insisted that the franchise must adhere to the strictest standards of quality. Sanders, who regarded KFC as his child, continued to be wary. He, Brown, and Massey traveled the nation talking to friends, relatives, and colleagues in the business. Finally, he agreed to accept their $2 million offer in 1964. Sanders would receive a $50,000 down payment in the sale, the Canadian assets of the business, and a $40,000 annual salary for the rest of his life. The most significant impact of his life had to be given up to obtain it all, and there is no proof that he was ever genuinely content with the outcome. KFC after Sanders. Sanders, who was 90 years old, passed away from leukemia on December 16, 1980. Before being laid to rest in Louisville, Kentucky, Kentucky State Capitol ordered his body to lie in state at the Kentucky State Capitol. Following Colonel Sanders' passing, KFC's success skyrocketed. It established itself as one of the top fast food brands in the U.S., opened thousands of locations around the globe, and reported a $436 million net profit in the fourth quarter of 2017. However, that achievement came with the Colonel's reputation being ruined. At one point, the KFC mascot even evolved into a dancing cartoon character who dunked basketballs and advertised Pokémon toys, relegating him to the status of little more than a marketing tool. In recent years, the business, formerly known as Kentucky Fried Chicken and now known simply as KFC, has even tried to distance itself from its southern roots. Sanders' family is no longer associated in any way with the business. Although KFC has made an effort in recent years to give Sanders' brand a new sense of respect, it's difficult not to wonder what the Colonel, a man who valued diligence, would think of the organization today. That's it from today's video. We hope you enjoyed the content. If you did, show some love, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on our excellent and informative videos.